happening now. Mitt Romney tells me whether he actually thinks Russia is an enemy of the United States. John McCain and Dick Cheney in a war of words over Sarah Palin. And judging Michelle Obama's touchy-feely Olympic performance. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Jerusalem, and you're in the Situation Room. Mitt Romney says he came here to Jerusalem to deliver an important message to the people of Israel and to the leaders of Iran. The Republican presidential contender is promising to support any and all measures, a direct quote, any and all measures to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear bomb. I asked Romney about that and much more in our one-on-one interview here in Jerusalem. Let's talk about Iran, because you've been very robust in saying that you will not, as president, accept Iran with nuclear weapons. So be specific. What would you do to make sure that would never happen?
Well, I spoke about 5 years ago at the Herzliya conference and laid out 7 steps that I thought were necessary to keep Iran from pursuing their nuclear folly. One of those steps, of course, was crippling sanctions, and it's taken a long time for those sanctions to finally be put in place. They could be, I'm sure, even more punitive relative to Iran, but that's a positive step. There are other steps that have not yet been followed. One other step, of course, is to make sure that we have credible military options that are available to us if no other of the initiatives is successful. Clearly, we all hope that diplomatic and economic pressures put on Iran will dissuade them from becoming a nuclear capability nation. But if all else fails, we, of course, have to keep a military option available.
But just to be precise on the Iran point, if the sanctions, the political sanctions, the economic sanctions, the diplomatic sanctions don't work, and Iran is about to develop a nuclear bomb, U.S. president would authorize a military strike.
I think I've said it as clearly as our president has. Again, I don't want to make foreign policy on foreign soil or say something different than our nation. Our president has said, and I have said, that it is unacceptable for Iran to become nuclear. And that would mean that if all other options were to fail, and they have not all been exercised, they've not all been executed at their most extreme level, but if all other options, diplomatic, political, economic, fail, then a military option is one which would be available to the President of the United States.
The last time you and I spoke in an interview, you told me that Russia was America's #1 geostrategic foe. Do you still believe that?
Well, there's no question, but that in terms of geopolitics, I'm talking about votes at the United Nations and actions of a geopolitical nature. Russia is the #1 adversary in that regard. That doesn't make them an enemy. It doesn't make them a combatant. They don't represent the #1 national security threat. The #1 national security threat, of course, to our nation is a nuclear Iran. And time continues to pass. They continue to move towards nuclearization. This is more and more disconcerting and dangerous to the world. But Russia, particularly look at a place like Syria, Russia has supported the Assad regime, even as it has been attacking its own people. Russia, likewise, has been slow to move to the kinds of sanctions that have been called for in Iran. Russia is a geopolitical adversary, but is not an enemy with missiles being fired at one another, or things of that nature.
All right, I'm glad you clarified that. On a timeline for withdrawal from Afghanistan, U.S. troops, the other day at the Veterans of Foreign Wars, you said you support bringing back all U.S. troops by the end of 2014, which is what the Obama administration negotiated as well. But earlier, you seemed to say that you wanted to consult with commanders. You didn't want a hard timeline or deadline for withdrawing from Afghanistan to announce what was going on. Do I sense there's been a change in your position?
No, it's the same posture I've had all along, which is that I believe the right target for us is to withdraw our troops by the end of 2014. At the same time, and in the speech I gave at the VFW, I said I would, however, also want to consult with commanders on the ground to make sure that that timeline was still the appropriate timeline, and that is something which I will continue to point out.
As someone who organized and ran the Winter Olympic Games, and all of us know you did an excellent job at that. Should there have been a moment of silence at the opening ceremonies for these summer games in London in memory of those Israeli athletes who were killed in Munich in 1972?
I expressed my belief actually before the games that there should have been a moment of silence on the 40-year anniversary of the brutal massacre of the Israeli athletes in Munich. I think recognizing the sacrifice and the horror of terror, even at the Olympics, is something which should not be lost on the people who weren't around or may not remember those terrible events.
On a political question, and we're getting ready to wrap it up, but all this money that's coming out, being raised in super PAC money, we're here in Jerusalem. One of your big supporters, Sheldon Adelson, is here. He has said he's ready to commit $100 million to super PACs to help defeat the President of the United States. All this money coming in, is this appropriate? What do you think about this?
Well, I must admit, I think I made very clear in my campaign in 2008 that I felt that the fundraising regulations and rules that exist in our country don't make a lot of sense. In fact, as you know, a candidate is able to raise a maximum of $2,500 for his or her campaign, a federal candidate. But there can be a super PAC on behalf of that candidate that takes millions of dollars. This just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I think we need to revisit. I hope at some point we're able to revisit our campaign finance laws and to have candidates responsible for the advertising of their own campaign, as opposed to having advertising and the message of a campaign oftentimes being spoken of more loudly by outside groups than by the candidate, him or herself. But what we've done is, by limiting what a candidate's campaign can receive at $2,500, we've now only opened up a way for people to that want to make a difference in a campaign to give to some outside group that can't be coordinated by the candidate. So the candidate gets the benefit of the money, but the disadvantage of not being able to, if you will, control the message and make sure that what these outside groups say is consistent with their beliefs. I think we've got it backwards. I'd rather see contributions going to candidates and having candidates take responsibility for what's said.
Because a lot of people are concerned if he's going to put in $100 million in his personal wealth, and I think Forbes says he's worth about $20 billion. A lot of those billions he earned obviously legally at casinos, not only in Las Vegas, but in China, in Macau, China, and people are a little antsy about that if you get the drift of the question.
Well, you'd have to talk to Mr. Adelson. As I understand it, his contributions are to a wide array of causes, but that are generally associated with conservative principles. And don't forget, there'll be hundreds of millions coming in from the CEOs of labor unions, not directed by their individual members, but directed entirely by the CEO of a union. And we have a very strange financial system for our campaigns right now, where campaigns are highly limited in what they can receive, but then vast sums, potentially, tens of millions, hundreds of millions potentially, in contributions are coming by outside groups that can't be controlled by the campaigns. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, okay, we're out of time. One final thought. You're in Jerusalem right now. You're a religious individual. Give us a little sense of what this city means to you, the Holy Land, as someone who obviously believes in God and has a deep commitment to his faith.
Well, as you know, I'm running for a secular position, not a religious position, but on a personal basis, being in the Holy City is very moving for me. I believe very deeply in the promises that were made in this place. I believe in the mission of Jesus Christ. Believe he walked the very streets that we're walking, and it's very moving and emotional. For anyone of deep faith to be in a place which is sacred to my faith, sacred to people of the Jewish faith, sacred to Muslims, and it's amazing how many religions count this as a holy place. Whatever your religion, I think being here draws you closer to the divine and makes you recognize that we are all children of the same God. And hopefully coming here, people recognize that we should draw together and not fight like little children, but instead act like adults that God created us to be.
Well said. I felt exactly the same way earlier today. I spent a few hours walking around the old city, and I totally appreciate what you're saying. Good luck. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf. Good to be with you. Take care.
Thank you. All right, so you heard Mitt Romney call the economic sanctions against Iran a positive step. I also interviewed the Israeli President Shimon Peres earlier today here in Jerusalem, and I asked him about the sanctions and whether, in fact, they are working.
The sanctions are functioning, are beginning. Apparently, they have impacted Iran. We have to wait a little bit more and see if this impact is sufficient enough to convince the Iranians to stop it. This will be the best way. None of us would like to see bloodshed. And the Iranians are not our enemies. Let's not forget it. Historically, we have had occasionally very good relations. The problem is not Iran, but the Iranian leadership and the Iranian policy, which is a pain in the neck of the entire world.
When you say months, how much time really is there, given what's going on right now?
Look, if the Iranians will agree right away, it can be tomorrow. But it doesn't look like, for the time being, they're intransigent. So right now there is a parallel effort, one by negotiating with them, they didn't bear fruits, and the other by increasing the sanctions. So we have to wait. I think it's a matter of months.
A few months? 6 months? 10 months?
I can't tell it. I can't tell it really.
But it's not years.
I don't think so.
All right, you're going to be able to see much more of my interview with the Israeli President Shimon Peres tomorrow, right here in the Situation Room. Stand by for that. We'll do that tomorrow. But up next, this hour, first Dick Cheney calls Sarah Palin the pick 4 years ago, says that was a, quote, mistake. Now the man who picked her, Senator John McCain, is firing right back at the former vice president. And speaking of a so-called mistake, the Defense Secretary Leon Panetta opens up about what he saw in Iraq that should not happen in the coming weeks and months in Syria. CNN's exclusive interview with Leon Panetta, that's coming up right here in the Situation Room.
We know they've moved some around.